I get up every morning and think, okay, who am I going to help today? Whose budget am I going to save? Whose projects am I going to save? Which women haven't had work because they've been having children who'll be now gainfully employed doing something terrific in a project? I was doing extremely well at school. I wanted to go on to do medicine. That was my plan. Fate and family dynamics intervened and that didn't happen. And so I went on and did my high school certificate at night while I had a full-time job in the public service. And then I went on and got a degree over 7 years while I also worked full-time. And all the top jobs were held by men. So I thought, well, this sucks. This won't work for me. So I approached the IT department, which was a new and exciting thing that was happening. And I took a demotion by 9 grades to swap, because I've always instinctively understood that mountain climbers don't go from peak to peak. They come down and go up another one. And I made my decision during that week that this is what I was going to do for my career. And I was 24 years old. At one stage, I decided that I wanted to work fewer hours for personal reasons. And they said, we don't have part-timers. And they had misunderstood me in the conversation because I wasn't actually negotiating. It wasn't, may I? It was, this is what I'm planning to do. I'd really like to do it here. The decision was, no, you can't do it here. So in that very meeting, I said, well, I guess I quit. So I went home and said to Ian, well, I don't have a job, so I better start a really nice company. The thing that astounds me looking back is I never once thought I would fail. I was incredibly arrogant. I rang up everybody I'd known 18 months before I'd got sick and just said, can we have coffee? And people say yes, people like to drink coffee. And I said, I can do this for you and this is what I want to be paid for it. And so I started working just contracting out myself. And if there are any women watching this, or I ever talk to women, I say, if you have a career break for whatever reason, do not come back into the first meeting with, I've been off for 18 months or I've been off for 12 months. They don't care. It's irrelevant. If you're putting yourself there to do some work, you don't start telling them why it won't work for them to start with. But Catherine Livingstone, I'm a great fan of Catherine Livingstone. She's currently chair of Telstra. She was the chair of CSIRO. She was the CEO of Cochlear. And so she's a woman in a man's world. She's maintained absolute truth and dignity to herself. She's a big supporter of women. You'll see most weeks in the press there'll be something about getting more women into maths and science. She doesn't see gender, she sees capability. And I just have an enormous amount of time for how she's conducted herself in the business world. So we still believe, massive generalisation, but I still believe it's mostly true, that we should be recognised and promoted based on our ability and what we can do, and people should recognise and know that and then promote us, and all the rest of it never happens. So I say my biggest thing is, if the ring swings by, grab it. So if it looks like a ring that suits you, just grab it and go on for the ride. Success for me, which I defined when I very first started RNC, was having enough money that I could say no to clients I didn't like. It's all I wanted. Everybody who starts a business decides they're going to work for CommBank, Westpac, AMP, you name the big companies, and they're all going to go work for them. And so I figured there was no way that I could distinguish myself adequately against all the other minnows trying to feed off those big ponds. But nobody ever goes the other place. And they're lovely to work with. If they come along and they say, I've got a PMP and look at my Gantt chart experience and I can do S-curves or J-curves or EVM or whatever, I am not so impressed with that. I'm impressed with their ability to think laterally. When I have a conversation with them, when I meet them, I will jump all over the show deliberately to see if they can keep up. I will try and suss out how hungry they are for money, because people who are desperate for money make poor project managers, because they'll be running the agenda to keep the job going rather than to get the job done. Madger is a tool that within the next 5 years probably most organisations will be using, whether it's it or another one. What Madger does is put the people-centric to it, so that every person's on it and then all their work is scheduled and they know who they relate to, who they're working for and who they're depending on, who's depending on them and who they're depending on. And I had the privilege a few years ago of giving a speech to all the project managers at Mesa, and which is a hoot. And people even there were coming up and saying, "Oh my God, we need this." When I started RNC, one of the other things, the things you don't think about very often, was that I decided that a certain percentage of our profits would go to charity every year. We've maintained that. Business isn't easy. It's actually hard, and you've got to play to win. I couldn't have imagined in my personal life and my professional life, if I'd sat down to do that whole 10-year goal thing, I would have sold myself short by a long stretch. So, and I don't think of it in terms of where am I. I don't think of it in terms of that. I think of it in terms of every morning I get out of bed, and Marnie and I and so others will have a conversation about, okay, who do we help today?